Caddis Maximus here again, this time with a review and comparison of right-angle screwdrivers. These are those screwdrivers that aren't very common but can get into places that no other screwdriver can. A couple of things of note, or one thing of note, is that these two drivers here, one is the smaller one is an OldForge and this larger one is a Cornwell, I believe these are actually kind of high access pry bars where you can get them just under a certain space and then use them to push and pull as a prying tool, as opposed to actually being specifically made as slot head right angle drivers. And that primary indication is the two 45-degree heads, but of course they will work on slot heads. And I did want to mention that, as these more likely are pry bars. I had a little bit of trouble looking up the part numbers on those, but they're quite similar, and I've always had them along with my right angle drivers, but after this review I'll probably put them with the pry bars. Now, aside from this apex, the big deal about these types of drivers, of course, they will fit into spaces that no other screwdriver can, while obviously allowing you to have a great deal of leverage. A lot of people are aware of stubby screwdrivers, but obviously this screwdriver is much larger than something like this, as we can see. I mean, huge difference. And even these little micro stubby drivers right here, which once you get a screw broken, these are pretty handy because you put your finger in the middle of it and then twist it. These are still much smaller than even one of those, and this just has a 1-inch, 1/4-inch hex bit in it. So that's the big advantage to these, is they can get into spaces nothing else can. And oftentimes where I've used these is, say, rear speakers on sedans and automobiles. Sometimes those screws are right under the glass, and you just can't get at them, or at least break the screw, without using one of these kind of drivers. And I found as I've used these, since they're kind of hard to find, I don't use them very often. I try to reserve them when I really need them. But an additional big advantage is the huge amount of leverage. So many times you can't really get into your hand into the space to really put a lot of pressure, and you have to kind of deal with that sometimes. But when you're working inside doors or anything like that, oftentimes you can get your hand in there and you can really get a lot of pressure. And sometimes, even when you're not in a constricted space, if you have a stubborn screw, you can just grab one of these, because you can just get your body weight right on top of it, and then you have this huge handle just to get a massive amount of leverage. So that is one distinct advantage of it, or of them. And we have a variety of different styles here, such as this Vaco, which is just more of a basic unit made out of 1/4-inch hex, or not 1/4-inch, but it looks like it's a 5/16 hex stock, and it works pretty well. There's you can actually see it. It's a VG3 on this one, and usually they'll have one on the flatheads, one at 90-degree angles to the other, so that you can break a screw, turn it 90 degrees, flip it around, and then turn it again. They also come in Phillips, and so these are a couple of Craftsman here, and I'll include the part numbers of all these that actually are available. But we do have a couple of Craftsmans, and these things are actually pretty decent. We have one which is a number 2 Phillips. Come on, focus. There we go. As well as a slot head. So this is a little bit more cumbersome to use for the slot head, but it is kind of nice that they include both on the same tool. They also have a different version, which is a number 1 Phillips, a small Phillips, or excuse me, a number 1 and a number 2 Phillips on the same tool. So they had a variety of different options. Phillips is a little more convenient because you can turn a Phillips every 90 degrees versus every 180 degrees for a flathead. This apex is a little bit strange. Actually, it just looked like a screwdriver somebody had cut off and bent. And I thought that too, until I just barely was able to make out that it says Apex right there. And it has a part number, but it's basically impossible to read. So I thought this was just kind of an odd driver, but it has been handy every once in a while. We have a GlobeMaster, so this one's in, actually I don't think they GlobeMaster didn't put part numbers on everything. But this is a larger, just number 3 Phillips. That's the only Japanese one I made. The rest of these are actually American made. We have one ratcheting Stanley Yankee driver. This thing's kind of interesting, a sheet metal driver. I did a review of 1/4-inch hex drivers, and I had a unit that was similar to this, but I didn't include this because this was an odd driver where it had a number 3 and a number 2 Phillips, but it's not replaceable. So when those bits wear out, you have to replace the entire ratcheting tool. Also, it's kind of funny, people complain about 36 tooth ratchets and all that being coarse tooth, and they have to have 72 tooth. This thing is a 12-tooth ratchet. So if you want to talk about how far it moves, it is reversible. There is a little reversing lever right here, and it does work pretty well. But this is a 12 position. So here we go. One, well, here we'll do it this way. 1, 2, 3. There's 3 clicks and you've turned it 90 degrees. Now that is a coarse ratchet, but it's really all you need for something like this. The only disadvantage to one that is this style, if you really want to get a lot of pressure on it, you kind of have to hold right here. You can't get right on top of it because of course you're pressing down on the sharp end of the Phillips bit and it's not very comfortable. But I always thought these were interesting because the Phillips bit is all machined. The bits are machined, and then the ratchet pawls, that is all just one piece of metal. So these were kind of expensive to make. And I can see why they're just not around anymore, because that's an awful lot of money to have a non-replaceable Phillips ratchet. But I always kind of thought these were handy, and they certainly have been in certain situations. The ratchet is really surprisingly stiff. That's the only thing. You got to keep these well lubricated, those little Yankees. Now, as far as the most premium one I've ever seen, that would be this Craftsman right here. Surprisingly enough, this does not have a part number on it, but this is one piece, or it's actually 3-piece version, all machined billet steel. So we have a turned square stock where they've laid it down. You can see that. Drilled holes in the end, and then use separate machined slot head bits and press fit them. Now, press fits can be super duper strong. So never had any worries about those bits slipping. And then the other thing that makes this premium is this is a 4-point slot head. So on all these others, such as this Vaco or maybe this OldForge here, you can only turn them the flathead every 180 degrees. With ones that have 2 heads that are at 90 degrees, we can turn 90 degrees, we can flip it around, and we can turn another 90 degrees. The advantage to this Craftsman is that breaks it down now to 45 degrees, because we have one head this way, one at 90 degrees, and then on the other side they placed it is straight, but it's at 45 degree angle compared to the arm of the tool. So we can take a flathead, turn it 45 degrees, and then flip it around. We go this way, turn it another 45 degrees, and then you come around to this side, turn it another 45 degrees, flip it around, and then continue to do that in 45 degree increments. The reason this side is straight is you can see the angle is this way, and then if we flip it over, now the angle is this way. So this gives you all the in-betweens. We'll say the up and then the down in-betweens. And so this is probably one of the best physical build quality ones I've ever seen. But obviously this hasn't been made for a while, and it's really expensive to have 3 machined pieces of metal just to make one of these drivers. Pretty expensive, but it is pretty impressive. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to bring these types of tools to people's attention. They're often long and lost, and I've seen people, they just get frustrated by a lot of basic screws. And I mentioned like inside, under car dashes and inside doors. Those tend to be some very tight spaces and a lot of frustration. And you can have some screwdrivers like these where you don't run the screw out. You just use them to break the screw and then, of course, to torque them back down when you're putting them back in. But these can save you a lot of time just because they can get into those places where literally no other tool can. Except for this Apex, which is an oddball, but I decided to include it. And just to mention, these I believe are a specialty kind of pry bar and probably belong with pry bars, so I'm going to be moving them from this category. But since I didn't have them there when I did my pry bar reviews, I decided to include them with this. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Catus Maximus out.